Is the Space Force reviving a beloved NASA telescope that was decommissioned in 2020? And why would the Space Force even be interested in a scientific observatory? Let's dive into this incredibly interesting and frankly puzzling story about the Spitzer Space Telescope. A few months ago, a daring plan came to light to revive a beloved observatory in deep space, the Spitzer Space Telescope. Here's the thing. Frankly, it feels big enough for NASA and SpaceX to be exploring a mission to boost and service Hubble, which is in Earth orbit at around 320 miles or 515 kilometers up. The Spitzer Space Telescope is currently around 2 astronomical units, or 186 million miles, that's 299 million kilometers, from Earth. Keep in mind that JWST is only 1 million miles, or 1.5 million kilometers away. Spitzer launched in 2003, and it's an infrared optimized observatory, a predecessor to JWST. It has a long operational history. Its initial 2.5-year mission stretched to 17 plus years, and it was still capable of doing good science when it was decommissioned. JWST's mirror is much larger than Spitzer's, but Spitzer can see longer infrared wavelengths of light. Over the course of its life, Spitzer found a new ring of Saturn, detected additional exoplanets in the TRAPPIST-1 system, and composed this stunning 360-degree panorama of the Milky Way. The cool thing about Spitzer also became the big problem with it. It orbits the Sun in an Earth-trailing orbit, which basically means it follows the Earth around the Sun. This ensures its view of the cosmos isn't limited by our planet's atmosphere. But because it moves so much slower than our planet, it gets further from us every year. Spitzer was never designed to operate for that long, which meant in order to communicate with Earth, it had to turn its solar panels away from the Sun and operate on batteries to align its antenna with Earth and send and receive data. As the distance from Earth got larger, so did the amount of time it had to be in that position in order to send and receive. While the high-gain antenna was initially capable of a 2.2 megabit per second data rate, at the beginning, it was significantly slower by the end of the mission. Basically, it was getting just harder and harder to operate. Because of these and other challenges, NASA retired Spitzer to be able to funnel that money towards JWST. The spacecraft was put in safe mode. That instructed it to turn off its instruments and systems in order to preserve whatever resources it had left. The spacecraft's solar panels were oriented towards the Sun, which means that Spitzer does have power and is technically operational, even if it's not currently in communication with Earth or doing any science. The spacecraft was officially decommissioned in 2020. Because of the distance of Spitzer and its current orientation, we can't communicate with the spacecraft right now. However, its low-gain antenna, it has 2 of them, are omnidirectional, and once the spacecraft entered safe mode, they've been sending very weak carrier signals to Earth. The idea is, in about 2053, when the Earth catches up with Spitzer, we may be able to take it out of safe mode using those low-gain antennas. But we can't really do that right now because that would require special hardware on the ground because the signal is so weak. But it is possible we may be talking to Spitzer before then. In May 2023, the U.S. Space Force, which is a branch of the U.S. military, announced that they were ordering an early-stage study into what's called the Spitzer Resurrector mission, contracting with a company called Rhea Space Activity for around $250,000 to explore the possibility of sending a robotic mission to service Spitzer and bring it back online. If the project is deemed feasible, the mission would launch in 2026. Spitzer Resurrector would travel to the observatory, restore it to operational status, and then remain there to act as a relay to send signals from the spacecraft back to Earth. There are so many questions here. While we haven't gotten an update since that original announcement, there was a brief mention in the House Appropriations Bill for the Defense Department's budget for 2024 that acknowledged that the Space Force was still pursuing this mission and encouraged the Secretary of the Air Force to do something similar. So we do know it's still possibly happening. I did check in with the Space Force to see if there were any updates on this, and I didn't receive a response, but if I do after the video is published, I'll update the caption below. I have quite a few questions about how this might happen, but it's just hard to speculate about that right now until we have more technical information. But also, why? Why is the Space Force interested in Spitzer, a scientific infrared observatory? Who would operate it? This is a Space Force mission, not a NASA mission. If the Space Force brings back Spitzer, would NASA operate it again? Considering right now, NASA is basically canceling the Chandra X-ray telescope to be able to fund future observatories, it does not seem realistic that they'd want to bring an old observatory back online that they had canceled partially due to funding issues. It's also worth mentioning that the partners on this mission are the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, Blue Sun Enterprises, and Lockheed Martin. So it looks like NASA isn't involved at all. And as I mentioned, why is the Space Force interested in Spitzer? Generally, the Space Force is only interested in science as it pertains to military strategy and technology, meaning there would have to be a good reason to do this. The release also does mention that the Space Force is interested in Spitzer because of its ability to detect near-Earth hazards like asteroids, which actually makes a lot of sense. That's a program that the Incredibly Sensitive Infrared Observatory actually helped invent. Infrared or thermal observations of asteroids are actually the most valuable in terms of figuring out the size of the asteroid and the albedo, which is the light they reflect. It's basically how we tell what asteroids are made of. But there's also this. One goal of the Space Force is what it calls domain awareness, which is basically just being aware of what human activity is going on in space. And they have shown a specific interest in cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the Moon. Spitzer is in a unique position to observe and monitor this region. It is possible that they'd use Spitzer to keep an eye on what's going on. Adding to that, it is important to note that this program is part of SpaceWorks, which is the Space Force's innovation arm. And specifically, this mission is part of SpaceWorks' Orbital Prime program. The aim is to develop the market for on-orbit servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. That means everything from on-orbit satellite servicing to assembling space stations in orbit to alleviating some of the space debris problem. This would be a great test and demonstration of these on-orbit servicing capabilities. It's quite possible there isn't a huge long-term goal here for the Space Force besides figuring out how to do this kind of robotic mission so far from Earth when frankly the stakes are pretty low. If it doesn't work, while I personally will be heartbroken, but if the Spitzer Resurrector breaks the telescope, it was already decommissioned, so there's no huge harm done. The idea of robotically servicing and bringing back an old telescope is a very cool idea, and I for one do hope it happens.